Welcome to part 2 of the Breathe mini series. If you haven't watched part 1, please make sure to do that, as this information will tie into part 1. What we are talking about in this mini series is using the rib cage to address pelvic floor tension and why we don't need to obsess over the pelvic floor and focus more on the rib cage. In this video, I'm going to be going through how the rib cage and the pelvic floor work together. The first thing that we want to understand is a lot of these concepts that I am talking about are going to have to do with pressure changes. Every time we breathe, inhale, exhale, we get a pressure gradient change in our body. We can also get pressure changes by using different positions. We are going to be using both of these concepts when we do our breathing drill together. Now, to help you understand a little bit more exactly what I mean by these pressure changes, let's talk about what goes on at the rib cage during an inhale and an exhale. During an inhale at your rib cage, we want all sides of the rib cage to expand. As this is happening, the lungs are filling with air, rib cage is expanding, and the diaphragm is moving down. This movement of the diaphragm is called an excursion. The diaphragm actually flattens down. It normally rests in more of a dome shape. So during that inhale, it becomes flatter, almost like a pancake, if you will. As this kind of pancake shape happens, the rib cage is expanding and lungs are filling with air. This is a pressure gradient change. Conversely, on an exhale, the lungs are now deflating and the diaphragm is going to change from that pancake shape to doming back up. The rib cage is going to move in on all sides, and that is what happens inside the rib cage on an exhale. So you may be wondering, how does that tie into what happens at your pelvic floor? Remember that everything in our body is connected. Nothing happens in a silo. When we inhale and we get that flattening of the diaphragm and we're getting that really nice movement at the rib cage, everything that is underneath that has to go somewhere. So when we think about that diaphragm flattening down, that movement is also going to impact where the fluid, the organs, etc., everything below that diaphragm is going to affect where it's at, and it will put a bit of pressure down on your pelvic floor. This is a good thing. Pressure on your pelvic floor is not a bad thing. Pressure in your core is not a bad thing. Pressure is a very normal thing that our body should be able to beautifully deal with, and it has these systems that it's wonderfully equipped with to help us deal with these pressure changes. As I was saying, when you inhale, the diaphragm flattens out and it's going to push down on the contents of your abdominal cavity. This push down puts a bit of pressure on the pelvic floor, and the pelvic floor needs to be able to accept the pressure. The pelvic floor kind of acts like a trampoline. When you jump on a trampoline, you don't want that trampoline to be super stiff because if the trampoline is super stiff when you go to jump on it, that is not going to feel good. There's going to be no rebound whatsoever. So think about the pelvic floor like a trampoline. As you inhale, contents are pushed down and the pelvic floor gently lengthens to accept that pressure. As you exhale and the diaphragm comes back up, the pelvic floor is essentially rebounding or floating back up. Now, if we have a rib cage that really doesn't like to move a lot, or perhaps it is more sticky on one side than the other, or in the front or the back, this can impact how that pressure moves, how the abdominal cavity reacts when we take an inhale. If the pelvic floor really isn't getting the message that, hey, you need to move down, accept some pressure, just kind of relax so things can come down, the pelvic floor kind of loses that range of motion, we can say, to keep things simple. What we are going to do is address how the rib cage moves. By allowing a bit more movement in the rib cage, we're going to affect the diaphragm's ability to flatten out, make a full excursion, and this is going to give some feedback to that pelvic floor that, hey, we need to be able to rebound. We need to accept some pressure here. There are some things going on. Changes are happening. This is a really good thing. So this is it for part 2. Make sure to join me for part 3, and I'll see you there.